hardest part's getting by this tree. I love mountain bikes because they are vehicles to some pretty amazing emotions. From fun to excitement to fear and even to pain and frustration.
Crank arm's loose.
But that's part of why we like them. So sometimes the bikes we are drawn to might just be a little enigmatic. This Niner WFO E9 has been a lot of fun, and it's checked so many of the boxes for me, but it also wasn't without a little bit of pain and frustration. I've ridden this bike in a variety of West Coast riding spots, mostly in Washington and Arizona. This bike has been my first experience with Niner bikes. No, this is not my first time riding a bike with a 29-inch wheel, nor is it Niner's first time making a bike without a 29-inch wheel, but it's my first bike from the Fort Collins, Colorado-based brand. One of my best supporters is the online retailer Jensen USA, and they are indeed a dealer for Niner bikes. Jensen offers a whole bunch of e-bikes, not just from Niner, but from other brands you've seen on this channel, including Intense, Norco, Orbea, Rocky Mountain, and more. I have a link in the description below over to this Niner WFO E9 at Jensen USA, and anything you purchase from Jensen will directly help me keep making these videos. And beyond Jensen, I'm also supported by P&W Components, Industry 9, and Shimano.
Cool, I'm just gonna go nice and slow because this is sketchy. Nice and slow.
Let's be clear about one thing. I'm not testing this bike on mountain bike trails. I have exclusively brought this bike to motorized riding spots, that is to say, motorcycle legal trails, or even roads. I mention this because it also describes my usage for an e-bike. It's on super rough and steep terrain that rarely resembles the kind of flow trails that most folks ride with their traditional bicycles. But that's also part of why I like this bike so much. It's just got a bit of raw grit to it that just makes me feel like this bike belongs in these types of trails. Weighing in at 59 pounds, the WFO E9 is no lightweight. I'm totally okay with that weight, as here it means it's got a great motor, good battery life, and plenty of suspension. The aluminum frame bike has a full 180 millimeters of travel front and rear. The bike also uses the powerful Bosch Gen 4 Performance CX drive system and houses a 625 watt-hour battery within the down tube. That means a ton of power and really good battery life. I set myself on a mission to get this bike riding how I wanted, and one thing I wanted to do was to feel confident when riding the way I tend to ride. My riding is pretty aggressive with lots of jumps, wheelies, and pretty over-the-top ridiculous cornering style. While the main theme of this video is how good this platform is for the kind of e-biking that I do, there were indeed some part spec pains. Now the bike's weight, all 59 pounds of it, is indeed substantial. And with 180 millimeters of travel, the bike needs to be ridden hard. These two factors require a solid build. On the first ride, I flatted the rear Maxxis Minion DHF EXO casing tire. The issue here is not the Maxxis tire, it's the EXO casing tires, which are simply not suitable for an e-bike, let alone any bike with long travel. I swapped over to the double down version of the same Maxxis Minion, and that worked way better. Eventually, I did put on a WTB tough casing tire combo. WTB was kind enough to sponsor me with those tires, so thanks to WTB. The heavier your vehicle gets, the more important good suspension is, as you have to rely on the suspension more to help find traction and forgive your mistakes. This is why suspension adjustments matter far more on motorcycles and cars than they ever will on bicycles. RockShox makes lots of good suspension products, but the stock Yari fork had a bit too much flex for it for a bike of this caliber. It also didn't have adjustable compression damping. The Yari is a good fork, but the stock damping will be better suited to a traditional bicycle and not to a 59-pound bike that's begging to be sent. I've had a great relationship with Fox, and I very politely asked them for some new suspenders for this bike. While Fox was all out of stock on rear shocks, luckily they did have a 38 Grip 2 180 travel short offset fork that they were so kind as to sponsor me with for this bike. I've added a few volume reducers and I've dialed in quite a bit of compression damping. Ironically enough, Fox also offers an e-bike specific 38 that has a lighter damping tune, as Fox observed that many e-bike riders stay seated for longer than regular bicycle riders. We could do a whole video on the subtle differences of riding an e-bike versus a regular bicycle, but I'm personally looking for my suspension to be tuned more for the oh my goodness moments than for the rest of the ride. The rear spring that came with this bike was a 450-pound unit. At my 170 pounds, this was quite a bit too soft, especially when hitting any jumps, and I would bottom out easily and often. Niner recently changed the stock spec on the size medium to use a 500-pound spring. However, I ended up going with a 550-pound spring. I do still bottom the bike out on awkward landings, but the spring rate feels way more appropriate. Quick side note, when I went to install the spring, it turns out that the shock hardware also needs to be removed, so if you want to go to a firmer spring, expect to make that swap in a shop and not trailside. The stock seat post is a 125mm drop KS unit, and it worked well, but that's not nearly enough drop for my riding style. I promptly swapped that over to a 180mm drop PNW Components Rainier version 2 seat post. However, the seat tube of the size medium is still too short for me to run that full 200mm drop, so I dialed it down to 180. I threw on some PNW bars, grips, and dropper remote that I use on all the rest of my bikes. While I am sponsored by Industry 9, the stock stands wheels perform pretty darn well. I would have liked some wider rims, ideally something at least as wide as 35mm, but the flows didn't really give me any troubles. The stock Guide RE brakes were a little low on power, and I had a front brake failure after riding in the mud. 2 of the 4 pistons in the front brake seemed to seize up, and the front brake power was massively reduced. SRAM does make some great brakes, and I think the codes would have been a fantastic choice for this bike. Needing to keep riding the bike, I threw an old XTR brake up front, along with a random 180mm Shimano rotor I had, and even with a smaller rotor, it provided more power and better modulation than the Guide did. What's the bottom line? Well, the heart of this bike is great. If you'll be riding this bike on rugged backcountry trails, you'll want to upgrade the suspension, brakes, and tires, but that's not a huge obstacle. With the proven Bosch CX4 drive system, the WFO E9 fills a niche that I wish was more common with e-mountain bikes. Well, if you excuse me, I need to go find some more mountains with this bike because I'm really having a lot of fun on it. Thank you all for joining me today. Hit that link in the YouTube description below. Visit Jensen USA and read more about this Niner WFO E9. And don't forget to hit that red subscribe button as well. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next week.
Oh, hey.